All right, we're going to get started on our next session. Just a quick reminder that one of the key missions of Water Congress is to represent the Colorado water users and work with the representatives on water-related legislation that's important to our membership. We have an incredible track record here at Colorado Water Congress. There has essentially been no bill that we didn't sponsor that passed, and 85% of the bills that Water Congress sponsored have passed over the years. So we're in a great position, and we are the right entity to help the new administration and new legislators next year really understand what's important to us and help direct new water policy. So we have the great panel here who are our experts. We've selected them for several reasons, and as I introduce them, I'll tell you why we think they're important. They're going to talk about what we think is not working perfectly well with water issues right now in Colorado, based partly on a survey that we asked our members to fill out. There were some things floating across the screen a little bit ago, also based on just their knowledge. There are some things that have worked well, and I'm just going to name them real quick, but we're going to concentrate on things that we would like messages that we would like to give to the new administration on what we think they should be working on. So there were three things specifically that came out of this group, the membership and our panel, that we think are working well. Across the board, people think that the Basin Roundtables are working well and are a good idea. The second thing that comes out loud and clear is the prior appropriation system, and especially now with all the flexibility it's afforded us over the years with different opportunities to affect water through there. And the last one, which I couldn't remember, was local calibration within the basins independent of roundtables. So those are three things that are working well, and they may hit on some things they'd like working better on, some of those things, but that's sort of not what we're going to talk about, but we did want to start with something very positive. So what we're going to concentrate on some things that are not working so well. And we have 3 or 4 topics that our panel is going to touch on. One of the first topics is funding, which is no surprise. Across the board, I think we all felt we had some difficulty with funding issues. We have permitting as one of our topics that our panel will talk about on maybe ways that this could be working better for us. Interstate issues, and finally, some issues on the IBCC and maybe the direction that it should or shouldn't be taking in the future. So we all know who is up here, but I'm going to very quickly reintroduce our panel and let you guys know why from a Water Congress perspective, we think they're the right people to be up here talking about this issue. So I'm going to start here with Eric Kuhn. So Eric is the former general manager of the Colorado River District, and Eric in that role has represented ag users and municipal users, environmental users on the West Slope, so he brings a broad perspective. Next to him we have Kathleen Curry. Kathleen is currently on the board of the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District, and Kathleen is a former state representative, and so she brings not only an ag focus and a focus from the Upper Gunnison, but also she knows how to work her way around legislative issues. Next to her we have Barbara Biggs. Barbara is currently the general manager of and I've got to make sure I get the whole world right. Roxborough Water something. Sanitation District, thank you very much. And Barbara brings a very interesting focus because she has worked her career on policy issues surrounding wastewater, which is really a strong thing that most of us are missing here. Next to her we have Mark Pfeiffer. Mark is currently on the board of the Southeastern Water Conservancy District, and Mark has a municipal background with the City of Aurora and Colorado Springs, and brings a water quality focus to our group that some of the other ones don't have. And next we have Eric Wilkinson. Eric's we got a lot of formers here, former general manager of Northern Water, and he brings a focus on really how to deal with permitting and getting projects built or almost built. So we'll have that perspective from Eric. Really closer than anybody else can say up here, so you're still good. And then at the end we have Travis Smith, and Travis is a consultant with DiNatale Water Consultants, and Travis brings a strong ag background as a former general manager for San Luis, and I'm probably going to get that one wrong too, but for an irrigation district. So he brings our ag focus. So I'm going to let these folks start talking. I'm going to start with a few questions and jump in if I need to. One quick disclaimer, we've asked them to be very honest and open with their thoughts, so whatever they say may or may not represent the views of their organizations. So that gives you guys carte blanche to say whatever you want. So I'm just gonna throw out a question or a topic, and we'll let people kind of go where they want. We don't have a lot of formal plans here for how we're gonna move around. So why don't we start with the funding issue? Okay. So a question would be, are we clear about what needs funding? Jump in. Thank you, Mark.
Well, I think, again, come at that in a couple different ways. One is, I think major water projects, there probably isn't available federal or state funding for at this point in time, and given competing demands, there probably will not be in the future, except for what I would call the public interest components of multi-purpose projects, like recreation and the environment. It's a public benefit for the public good, and the public as a whole should probably help pay for that. And whether that's a bottle tax, you know, some other type of sales tax, or whatever it happens to be, that could be, you know, one way to fund that portion or component of future water supplies that are necessary in the state. The other funding example I came up with is totally different, and that is, I don't know, some people may have seen a presentation I gave a few years ago on megatrends, and one of them that I noted, which at first you wonder what does it have to do with water, is income disparity. And that's a consequence, frankly, of demographics and obviously income. We have the elderly becoming a larger and larger portion of the United States population, including Colorado's, and we have the working poor. And given the fixed income nature or the low income nature of those two groups, and the rising cost of basic water services, a pinch point is going to be reached because there's competing demands on people's budgets for medical services, for housing costs, et cetera, for basic transportation. So where does the money come from to meet the basic water need for water service? And so that's going to be something that the utilities are going to have to work, I think, in tandem with the state on, and probably the federal government to some limited extent. But that's just a couple of thoughts on funding.
I sometimes think that when you're tackling a problem, maybe it's good to start with an example of where it's worked. So I did a presentation last week to the Littleton Leadership Academy on collaborative efforts in the South Metro area to solve water issues. And I was trying to identify common themes amongst all those projects. And one of the common themes I identified was the fact that there has always been a state participation in those projects. It may not be a big participation, but it's always been there to keep things moving. Chatfield reallocation is a great example. Chatfield would have died 20 years ago, but for the CWCB's participation in keeping it alive. In Northwest Douglas County, there's a tremendous effort or need to get people off non-renewable water supplies and get them onto a renewable water supply. So a small district like Roxborough can step in and help with that if we have the collaboration. So to bring in another 250 customers, we had grants from the state, loans from the Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority, grants from Douglas County. I mean, when you think about especially smaller utilities, it's really critical to think about that common thread. So I think the state and other local entities can really play a role in funding to help us keep partnerships together and do the collaboration necessary to solve some problems.
Thank you. Can we deviate from the question at all? Yes. Okay, so, well, I'm clear that local entities need to set their own priorities for the funding. So the original question was, are we clear about what needs to be funded? I'd say we have a good structure in place to make those determinations, but I just want to refer us back to the speech that Walker Stapleton made and the need for funding and using general fund at the legislature. Since if we want to communicate this message to the next round of legislators, I don't think it's practical for the water community to conclude that we can siphon off, money from the general fund for infrastructure improvement. I just think the battle for the general fund is just too fierce, and it's not going to be a realistic solution. So, and that's this, and remember, these are just my opinions.
Could I provide just a short answer to your question? Are we clear? And I say, no way. But I think we have time to get there. And the reason I say that is that what are we funding? What is the source of funding? What is it going to be used for? What's it not going to be used for? And when I look at the funding problem, you know, Denver Water, Colorado Springs, Aurora, all three of those entities are spending billions to improve their own water supplies, and I'd throw in Northern as well, but it's a bunch of cities. But those three represent about half the population of the state. So those are about half the voters. They're already seeing increases in their water rates because they're going to be funding, you know, where Jim Lockhead is, they're a very aggressive capital program in all three of those communities. So how are we going to then ask them to fund something else without making a case that it's important? A couple things I think have to be absolutely off the table is we're not funding new growth. We're not funding controversial projects, whether that's East Slope, West Slope, or agriculture, agricultural conversions. And I think we got to start there, but I think it's not very clear what we're doing, where we're going. And just the idea, well, we're funding the water plan, that doesn't do it.
I guess I would like to take the opportunity to maybe divide your question into two parts, funding and financing. Funding, I want to play off some of the comments that Mark stated in regard to the social costs of a project. I think Colorado's somewhat missing the boat in regard to the ability to take advantage of some projects that are being proposed out there to make them truly multi-purpose projects, to really enhance the recreational environmental aspects of those projects. The template that we've worked under historically is the project proponents obviously have to take care of the mitigation. I think that's fair, mitigation of the impacts. But there's a potential on new projects to enhance things. And I think Northern has looked at that with the Windy Gap Firming Project and the Northern Integrated Supply Project to enhance, I'll call it past sins, past actions that have caused an impact on the environment of the recreational community. But is that fair to project proponents? Project proponents are saddled with that. And in some cases, it precludes the ability to move a project forward. So funding in regard to social enhancements, social benefits, those type of things, I think, is a question that really needs to be addressed. Financing, on the other side, I think the state can do a lot with that, and the state has done a lot. But the state needs, I'll call it a bigger kitty to work with. We're looking at some pretty large projects out there that need financing. Project proponents are fully aware that they need to finance those projects. But there are things that the state can do, and I want to very much applaud CWCB for some of the innovative things they're doing with project financing or project facilitation, I'll call it, through financing, is making money available at low interest rates. One of the things that I think is a key item out there that CWCB really needs to pursue is subordinate loans. We have one of those authorized for the Windy Gap Firming Project. You cannot believe the advantage that a subordinate low interest loan from CWCB makes when project proponents go out on the bond market to get bonds. It's incredible because by doing that, the state has really enhanced the bond ratings of multi-participant projects out there. And all of us know the reality of things is if you have a multi-participant project, the best bond rating you can get is the lowest common denominator. And some of the project participants obviously are growing communities. They have a lot of indebtedness already. So the financing enhancements that the state could provide without really costing the state money. In fact, through the CWCB loan program, they get the money back eventually. But you need to enhance that kitty to be able to do it. So I guess I would look at that question as both a funding question and a financing question.
So Eric, you said you talked about funding and not just mitigating the effects of potentially a project, but actually enhancing the environment. Now that sort of lends into a permitting question. Should that be a requirement of permitting, and is the permitting part of the problem here with the funding? I'll let you.
Well, I'll just
Permitting.
jump right into that one. I would not want to see, personally, enhancements being a requirement of permitting. I think enhancements are a necessity if a project's going to move forward. Enhancements are necessary, I think, to address conditions that may already exist that are caused by past actions when social attitudes and social values were somewhat different. And we're moving into, obviously, a more environmentally aware, recreationally aware attitude in Colorado, which is proper. But dating myself, I can remember when, ag and getting water on ag was the thing to do, and drying up rivers was not considered bad. It was considered water development and progress. Well, I really dated myself on that one. But anyway, with those thoughts in mind, there are ways to address those past actions in conjunction and in collaboration with new projects. And I think you get a better buy-in in projects, as you should. I mean, if there's a project moving forward, you get in an economy of scale by having more interest, more purposes involved in that project. You spread out the costs, you spread out the benefits, and everybody obviously benefits from that with enhancements. Mitigation, obviously mitigation should stay in the permitting, and it needs to be addressed by the project proponent. But permitting unto itself, something has to change. Something has to change because we do need obviously we need conservation. I'm going to put that at the top of the list. But we need new projects. One thing about climate change, or whatever you want to call it, the common denominator I see is the wetters are going to be wetter and the dryers are going to be drier. And what do you do to compensate for that? You build projects. You have to even out that cycle. And we need to figure out how to do it better. I was extremely encouraged a couple years ago when the LEAN project was done by CWCB, Department of Health, State of Colorado, EPA, Reclamation, Army Corps of Engineers. But I, frankly, am a little disappointed that hasn't been carried to a more complete step or complete product because we're not really any better off now than we were 2 or 3 years ago. The other thing about permitting is it takes a long time. And if you have a $500,000 project at a 4% interest rate, think about that. That's $1 million a month of a $500 million project. That's over $1 million a month, almost $1.5 million a month in every month it takes you to get that permitting done. So it's not that it needs to be shortened in regard to requirements. It just needs to be streamlined. It's got to be efficient. It's got to be effective. It's none of those right now. And it is a costly situation, both in doing the studies, but in project costs as well.
So does anyone want to weigh in on what can the state of Colorado do? What can the new administration do, the legislature do to help this permitting issue?
I'll start that. And since I'm retired, I can say controversial things. They're not attributed to anybody. The first one, and it's semi-controversial anyway, I think we need 1041 reform. And that does not mean repeal. That means reform. I mean, having gone through the permitting on the Homestake Phase 2 project, the Prairie Waters project, the Southern Delivery System, I'm familiar with 1041. And the problem is there are no set, understandable, upfront criteria for a project proponent to address. It seems to be just an open game. I as the one granting the permit will get as much as I can get, and we'll just dicker forever on how to reach the end point. So I think the legislature needs to step up and say, okay, this is the way it's going to work. These are the criteria that will apply to a water project through this jurisdiction. The second point, and the second controversial comment that I'll make, is there has been some reform at the federal level on permitting. And that may be the only good thing on the current administration. Controversial. But for the people that aren't aware of it, this administration has issued both an executive order, but more importantly, a one federal decision MOU signed by all federal agencies. Every one of them signed it. And it is fairly detailed. It lays out a permitting process. It has a goal of finishing NEPA in 24 months. You have decision points at purpose, need, and alternatives identification, milestones throughout that are agreed upon, project proponent, other interested parties, involved federal agencies. It is actually a good template, and it's something that state could build on, and the state could, and under the MOU, can be a cooperating agency. And so, again, they can work in tandem. The other thing that's out there is the FAST 41 process from a few years ago on transportation projects, but is equally applicable, and people don't generally know this, to water projects. And again, there's milestones, there's a dashboard that's publicly available on the internet for each project, and basically what you're doing is shaming the agencies into speeding up the process. And that's really the way I look at it. When it says on the dashboard, this portion of the alternatives analysis should have been done in 8 months, and it turns out to be 38 months, Congress can say, what are you doing? And again, that's something the state could look at, adopting something of a similar nature. There's tools out there, and I think they can work both at the federal and state level if people have the political will to make them work.
I think that's the first time I've seen Mark even half irritated, speaking that freely about permitting. So if I could have a conversation with the new governor about permitting, I would go back to the 2010 letter that was drafted by the IBCC. And the IBCC wrestled with a number of issues. Of course, funding was one, but I think the biggest one was the political will. And I called it the nod factor, that at certain parts of the project as a project proponent, and if you had certainty that you fulfilled the requirements, it would be helpful from the governor's office to give a nod about, I think with what we know at this point right now, and there's more questions to be answered, but with what we know right now, it would be helpful from the administration, from the state, to say, this looks like we're on track. And so it's that political will, and we have several former IBCC members here, and I remember drafting that letter, and it came down to the political will. That's probably the biggest thing that the state can bring, provide some certainty for the project proponent, but at certain crossroads and certain benchmarks, We'll check that off so you don't have to go back and do it again with the next agency and for the review. And I agree with Eric that delays. So in the life of a project, it starts with a conversation, it becomes a concept, you gather some momentum, you get some cost estimates, then you go gather up a little money, and then you get some final drawings, and then you go and get it approved by the state engineer, and then you go get a land exchange, and you understand the uncertainty that goes on, but that inflation clock is running. So 5 years goes by, and then you have to go back, get an updated cost estimate, you got to go get some more funding, and it is a real challenge, and I think there's always been a challenge in building projects. The funding seems to follow with good projects, but it's how you get through the permitting.
Okay, well, to change gears, and I'm not sure how much time we have left because the clock isn't quite working. Do you know what time it is here? But you brought up the IBCC, so great. So why don't we just shift a little and talk about the IBCC and some of the comments that we got from our water users. And I'm looking for those comments, sorry. So we all, I think across the board, people thought that there was a whole lot more collaboration because of the BRTs and local collaboration, but some thought that maybe it didn't quite go as far as the IBCC. So one of the questions that we got from our group was, are we clear to the purpose of the IBCC? And is there sufficient definition to what exact problems the IBCC is intended to resolve?
Yeah, I'm retired, yeah, along with Eric and Mark. So, you know, I think the IBCC has some great potential with some clear direction. I've been on the IBCC since the first meeting, or was on the IBCC since the first meeting. And I think in the 2010 letter that Travis mentioned, I think in the process we went through to get to the framework, the IBCC did a really exceptional job. I think where the IBCC runs into a problem is when the IBCC meets and we kind of sit around and scratch our head and said, all right, what's on the agenda and why? It's not clear to me what the role of the IBCC will be in funding. I think it can have a positive role, but I think its role will be quite limited on how to move forward with the funding. I would have been the first to say, if you're talking about taking something to the ballot, that's not me. And I was on the IBCC, and I think that's not most of those who are currently on the IBCC. So the IBCC has the potential, if the problem in front of it is clearly stated, if it's a problem that has implications for all of the roundtables, if it can engage all the roundtables, and if its purpose is well defined in terms of the problem. Other than that, I think the IBCC is not really a functional entity unless it has a specific problem in front of it that it can solve and that is well suited to solve.
Thank you. So when the legislature contemplated establishing the roundtables and the Interbasin Compact Committee, I think there was a lot of conversation about how the IBCC could serve in a function that was almost a mediation role, where individual basins could come forward to the IBCC and say, hey, we want to work out a compact, hence the name. I don't know that that's the way things have transpired. I think, frankly, you know, again, speaking for myself, we have enough water meetings to go to, so if it doesn't have a real clear function or benefit, then why couldn't we revisit whether we even need it? But I think it's underutilized. I think it's the top-notch people attending these meetings, and one role that perhaps it could play is, and I wanted to ask Jim Lockhead this during the last session, is there any role for the IBCC or even the roundtables with regard to the looming shortage on the Colorado River, because those are interbasin conflicts and situations that perhaps that could be a role. But the initial thought really was that they could help basins talk to each other. And we do need to have basins talk to each other, so that's just a thought.
Well, I would just say that Kathleen's exactly right. That was a statutory directive, but there's constitutional and statutory constraints on their ability to accomplish it. That's the problem. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
I think IBCC had a role. I think it played an important role in the development of the Colorado Water Plan, directly or indirectly. It was a more robust forum, I think, for a grassroots discussion of interest of the various roundtables, then coming together and sharing those interests, and in some cases, like the conceptual framework, actually formulating those concepts into something that could be incorporated in the state water plan. I question obviously the statutory capability of IBCC in regard to compacts. I don't think it's there. It isn't a sovereign. The states or the roundtables aren't sovereign, so getting an interbasin compact isn't there. I was on both IBCC and CWCB, and I think there was an inherent conflict between IBCC and CWCB. I personally am obviously avid supporter of CWCB. It has a statutory role, and it serves it, in my opinion, very, very well. I think IBCC right now is maybe an organization that's looking for a problem to discuss. I think its role has been diminished, if not eliminated, myself.
Well, and I want to go back to, okay, let's find an example of how we would like it to work or how it has worked and see if that can be translated. So let's take the Metro Roundtable and the South Platte Roundtable. You know, you had the classic urban, rural, urban, ag, tension between those two roundtables until we collaborated on our basin implementation plan. And we collaborated on our basin implementation plan. We found that we had very clear commonalities, that we could come up with priorities that were common to both basins. And out of that has grown the group that has taken off their agency hats and has developed the South Platte Regional Opportunities Working Group. And I think real things are going to come out of that. 50,000 acre feet of firm yield could come out of that effort. How do we take that example and translate it to broader discussions? Because that's the way it can and should work.
So, from a former's point of view, and I see John Stolp out in the crowd, my experience on the IBCC was maybe a little bit different, and I was also on the CWCB at the same time. I saw its role evolve mainly in developing relationships, sharing information, gaining a little trust. And of course, each basin roundtable, this might surprise us, but each basin roundtable operates at a little different level, a different level of formality, or their projects might be different, and certainly their characters at the roundtable are different. But I think the IBCC still has a relevant role in filtering these interbasin ideas, statewide issues that we may not be able to fully flesh out at the roundtable level. So I've been thinking about our panel up here, and there's several formers. There's former IBCC members, there are former CWCB members, there's former project members, former legislators. And I think what I would tell the new governor is that there has been a great team assembled through the roundtable. All of you that have been a part of the water plan and the basin plan, that I would tell him that keep building the team, keep finding good team members. And I'm looking for a couple out in the crowd, but there he is. There's one. It's that bad shoulder, Mike. Where's the other one? Where's the other team member? Right there. So I challenge you to find some other team members to continue this experience that we've been on. I think the roundtable, and we agreed, has been a great experience. I think the IBCC has some value. There were challenges before about funding and permitting, and there'll be challenges ahead. But I hope that you'll think about being a part of the team, being a good team member, and then finding some other younger team members to be a part of that.
Okay, thank you, sorry. Honestly, I was supposed to have a clock here. Doug, I don't have a clock here. So the last issue that was brought up was interstate issues, which I think falls right in line with the IBCC. And some of the feedback that we heard was, are some interstate issues, and I'm going to throw you a little bit on the bus, like the risk assessment that the West Slope's doing, should that have been something that really should have been taken on by the IBCC? Some other comments we have is, do we have the right leadership at CWCB and in other areas right now for interstate issues? So not my opinions, because I don't have any opinions here, but these are sort of some of the things we're hearing from membership. And I would like your opinions on this. And Eric, I'm sorry I threw you under the bus on the risk study. Maybe you want to touch that one a little bit.
Again, as a former both, you know, I think the way I look at what's going on in the Colorado and in the West, it's not just the Colorado. The Rio Grande has problems that, you know, it's a smaller river, has fewer states, but the problems are every bit as extreme, and the impacts are as extreme. We just felt that we needed to step forward and get transparency. Two things we wanted to do with the risk study was transparency, which we were not seeing from the state, and two, get a broad range of facts. So if you have facts that are very confusing, and they are very confusing, you got to get them out there, and you got to get them out there over and over again, do them over and over again, and do it in a transparent way. And we chose to move our own direction because we did not see a consensus coming to do either of those from the state. And I think Andy Mueller, who talked about that this morning, basically said that we need to realistically step up and deal with the problems that are on the table, not the ones we hope we have or that were yesterday's problems.
Okay, this is my favorite topic. How do you feel, Eric, about, since I missed the session this morning and what Andy said, is there confidence in the CWCB being the right forum for handling a discussion that is going to have a fair outcome for the whole state and have it not be dominated by front range interests? Was there a consensus that the CWCB was the place to go to make sure that we have even-handed water policy? Did that come up?
The answer is that has always troubled us, you know, going back 80 years. The reason in 1937 you have both a Colorado River Water Conservation District and a Colorado Water Conservation Board is there wasn't that confidence nearly 100 years ago. And I think there's more confidence now. You look at our history, there were some really huge strains in the 50s and 60s and 70s. I look back and say conditions between the Front Range and the West Slope, conditions between the CWCB and the state. I think they're at an all-time high. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of work to do to get them to where they need to be.
Do you mind? So in terms of getting back to what we need to communicate to the next administration, and I think just speaking for myself and a lot of my colleagues on the West Slope, we want to make sure this administration, knows that that our opinions matter as much as the folks on the Front Range, and the way the CWCB was set up is a really great structure. It really brought equity, and I hope that we can, that's one of those things maybe that was on the list of not broken in the beginning. And I hope, I want to also concur with the observation earlier that the IBCC and the roundtables don't have a lot of authority. Well, actually, pretty much no authority. And it's a great forum for conversation, and they ought to, and we've built some great relationships now in the Gunnison that we wouldn't have had otherwise between the upper and lower basin. So I'm thankful for that, but I think with regard to the issue that was raised several times earlier with the shortage on the Colorado River, I would sure be looking at what direction the CWCB is heading on this, and making sure I was keeping up with that.
I guess I would just add that unfortunately we have another one of those aging problems, seriously. I mean, Eric, and at some point, Jim, we're losing them. And the knowledge they have is unbelievably extensive. I mean, I didn't kill you off yet.
Still here.
That's right. But at some point, they have to have people stepping into their shoes. And it's just an extremely complex and difficult issue. And somehow we have to transfer that knowledge base, and we need to do it now. And I'd say the new administration needs to do is make sure they have the best people to bring in to staff the CWCB, hopefully with some pre-existing knowledge, but also call upon these guys and gain some of their insights, and then also make sure that there's an adequate number of staff. So that, again, is a funding issue, obviously, but it's absolutely critical given the importance of the Colorado River to this state.
I think without a doubt, if you look at the statutes, CWCB is the agency that is charged with interstate relationships and interstate compacts. There's no doubt about that. And I have confidence in CWCB. I have confidence in the Attorney General's office. And I think it behooves the water users in the state of Colorado to support their efforts. And I guess I'm almost retired completely. I think the Colorado River issues are such that we have to find a solution, and we have to find a solution, a general solution in the next 3 months. And it's up to the water users to help CWCB and the AG's office to find that solution. And I'll just say, sometimes there's too much bickering between the east slope and the west slope, and we've got to put that aside and find how to come to a solution. I'm just afraid with the state of Colorado, and I'm probably jumping rails here, but in regard to maybe getting ahead, but I'm afraid if Colorado and the upper basin states don't get an acceptable DCP, that we can run parallel through Congress with the lower basin's DCP. We have lost all our leverage with the lower basin states. And we've got to position ourselves in Colorado and in the upper basin to, in essence, compete with the lower basin DCP. So when that train leaves the station, we're on that train, and we have the leverage to be able to get what we need out of that, while the lower basin is getting what they need out of it as well. There has to be, I think, in the next 3 or 4 months here, excuse the expression because it's a little sacrilege and I feel bad about it, a come to Jesus meeting about the Colorado River and figure out how we're going to do it, maybe not to the details, but to the concepts, so we can go with the other upper basin states and come up with something that we can live with, but be parallel and in step with the lower basin when they're going through Congress to get what they need.
Well, and if I could just add briefly, I want to reiterate what Eric just said, and I think Travis would agree with this too. Having served with both of them on the CWCB, I've never served on a board where people genuinely came together to listen to each other and seek, the best solution. Sure, you're from, I was from the metro area, Travis is from the Valley, Eric is from the South Platte, but we always were able to look at it from the perspective of the state as a whole. What's best for the state as a whole? So I can't say enough for how much it meant to me to work with all of you to work through a lot of issues, and I am confident that the CWCB is the right forum, and I can't imagine, having worked with a lot of state and federal agencies, there is not a harder working group of people than the CWCB staff. Mark used to lead an agency that loves to complain about lack of resources. You never, ever, ever hear that from the CWCB. They just roll up their sleeves and get it done.
So, that reminds me of a great quote. Don't find fault, find a remedy. Okay, anybody can complain, and I would agree with Barbara. My tenure on the Water Conservation Board was a great experience. 2005, if you remember the issues of 2005, they were numerous, but it was similar to what we're dealing with right now. How can we find a way to work together? How can we knew what the problems were, but to come up with solutions, that's the real challenge. And so I was interested in the question about the CWCB. In my mind, CWCB has certainly evolved along the way also. But when you think about where the agency is now compared to where they were in 2005, and how the confidence, at least in my neighborhood, about the CWCB and the programs that they provide, and what I call the initiative, the seed money that's provided really to create cooperation. And so if I had 30 seconds with the governor, I would say continue this stuff that's been practiced at the state level. And Russ George, when he first cooked up this idea and we were there, we thought about, here was the conversation, there are projects on the sideline idling, but because of the uncertainty, especially for the ag community, they didn't have the wherewithal to take on the risk to deal with the uncertainty of permitting and financing and the concept. And so I am a CWCB, I'm confident that CWCB, with the right resources and direction from the new administration, to continue the good work that we've come to expect from the agency.
So, thank you, panel. So are you, all of you here, willing to help CWCB, or help Water Congress, put together some clear and concise direction for what we think needs to happen? Both what we don't want to change, what we know is working well and we want them to stick with it, and what maybe the new administration might consider changing. And if so, would you be willing to work on that and put together some sort of a working paper for our membership to look at in the next few months? Yes. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, let's thank our panel and